So I wanted to talk about web app pen testing for people who don't normally do web app pen testing. One of the questions that a lot of, right, like Sierra, a lot of folks will ask people who are in the business of pen testing, how do I get started? And the answer, I think, is different from different people. So, and different for different people, really. So this is like a way to get into it if you're not already doing it. Otherwise, this is kind of a cool way to see what else is going on when a pen test happens. I think it's important to remember the stuff here that everybody knows something that you don't know. Everybody you meet has something, some experience, some knowledge that you don't have. And if that's true, then the other thing is true also, right? That means that you know stuff that other people don't. And that, I think, is relevant for web apps more than other types of pen testing. Once if you're pen testing a Windows environment, it's pretty well defined the way Windows handles the things that Windows handles. But web apps, every single one is different. You get similar issues, of course, but they all come about differently because every web app exists for a different purpose. And I think some of the advice that people give out is a little bit too detailed. It's easy to get excited about things you're excited about, and it's easy to forget if you're talking to somebody who's not got the same background that you have, that sometimes you can say words that don't mean anything, and that doesn't help. So I think that web app pen testing is the easiest type of pen testing to get into because you already know how to use web apps. Unless you've done training on it, you don't know how to set up a Windows domain. You don't know how to set up a network. You don't know how to write software programs that you compile and run then without training. But everybody in the world now, everybody at least here, if you knew enough to come to this webcast and click all the buttons and make the picture show up on your screen and follow along, you know enough to start web app pen testing. It's also way easier to set up and way easier to stay out of trouble because you can run everything on a system that you own yourself, and then you don't have to get permission from anyone else. So when I started pen testing, I came from a testing background, like a QA kind of testing, and I got all this advice on where you should start, what sorts of things you need to learn in order to be a good pen tester. And I love the teapot guy.
I know, it's hilarious.
So these are all things that people told me I needed to know before I began pen testing. And these are all things that I'm sure some of you know already, and some of you are kind of scratching your heads, and some of you are thinking, well, gosh, maybe I ought to get back and study IP version 6. But all these things, you don't need to know these to get started. You also don't need to know all of this stuff here too, what a domain controller is, how Windows manages memory. The picture, I can't remember, there's a Japanese word for like useless invention type things. I can't remember what the word is, but there's, my favorite one is the t-shirt that has on the back of it printed a grid, like a battleship grid, and it comes with a card that has the same grid on it. And you wear that t-shirt, and then if you have an itch on your back, you can point on the card to your neighbor on the subway and they know where to scratch.
Perfect. Definitely worth money.
Oh yeah, definitely. And the eye drop problem. So all these other things. So you don't need to know how to use a debugger. You don't need to know what little endian or big endian means. Somebody asked me on Twitter, when I was on Twitter, I've been away from Twitter for a while, but he asked, hey, how do I get started in pen testing? And I gave him kind of the Twitter version of this talk, and he's like, oh well, but should I learn how to use Kali? Like, well, Kali is a whole distribution of Linux, so Kali's not a thing that you should learn. The only thing that's cool about Kali that makes it neat for pen testing is that a lot of stuff is pre-installed. The vast majority of the stuff that's on there, you're not going to use on any given pen test. It's handy to have, but it's not a thing to focus on. You also don't need to know scripting, command line stuff. It can be helpful, of course, all this stuff can be helpful, but you don't need to know it. I did the first, 6 years of pen testing on Windows, and just with Firefox and Burp Suite, and that was it. So all those things they're all useful, they're all good things to know, but don't let them distract you, and don't think that you need to know that stuff before you begin. So the things that you do need You need to be curious because you're constantly exploring what's going on. You need to be persistent because things don't break neatly the first time you poke at them. And you need, it's funny, this is the last one I added here, the attention to detail, and I didn't add it until like this morning. I was going through the rest of the presentation realizing that, wow, I'm kind of being really nitpicky about certain things in here. And that's it. That's the whole it. If you notice when a little thing is wrong, then maybe web app pentesting is for you. If you notice when, last time I came here, the screen was aligned this way, and this time it's aligned that way, or that little message, that welcome message, didn't used to be there. What's different? If you notice those things, that's awesome. That's where the cool things come from.
Which is funny because those are the same things that would be useful to learn anything.
Right. It's the
Anything.
little things. It's the little things. And a place to run virtual machines helps a lot. So I saw this quote. I didn't know who made this quote, but Arthur Ashe was a tennis player. So speaking of liberal arts and learning from other people, what does a tennis player have to teach you about pen testing? Well, this, you have some resources, you have some skills, you have a place to start. Start wherever you are and build on what you already know. So this is like, if I had to say what are the fundamental things about web app pen testing that you should learn about, these are those. So you need to know how to use a web browser. Then if you're here, check that one off. And you need to know what I consider to be the fundamental problem for web browsers, which I'll get into, and the fundamental security defect in web apps. I will posit that there is only one. You need to know a little bit of HTML, a little bit of JavaScript, and a little bit about HTTP. But I think everyone who goes into web app pen testing that didn't go to school for it, if you can go to school for it, learned HTTP as they go. It's not a thing you want to sit down and read about. You'll figure it out as you go. What, did someone disagree? No, I loved reading the HTTP spec. It's awesome. So
no one said that.
It was something else, I'm sure. So I'm going to keep going. So the problem of browsers is described fantastically in this book, The Tangled Web. It's kind of an old book, but don't let old get in your way because it's still the same web. The fundamental problem of a web browser is keeping secrets from other places, from all the places it goes. It's concerned with trust and trust boundaries. So trust, I had to look up a definition because we're doing an academic type presentation here. So trust is the acceptance.
Word lovers unite.
Word lovers. Trust is the acceptance of the truth of a statement without evidence or investigation. And we had a little discussion about this yesterday, about whether that's a good definition for trust or not.
I disagreed.
And, well, see, but I think it is. I think it's a great definition because if you think about personal relationships, somebody you're close to, you take what they say, you trust them. You don't investigate everything that they say to you to see if it's true or not, but you do that because you have experience with that person and you've learned over time to trust them.
Because of previous evidence and investigation.
Exactly. So you've learned that at this point, you don't have to do that anymore with this person. And that's why, when you break trust interpersonally, it's such a horrible thing because it took you so long to build that up. And now I'm not going to get into all that. But so trust. So what can I trust without validating it? So if you think about things that you do on the internet, would you do this? What's on the slide here? Would you download and run a program that you never heard of from a place you've never been with no idea what it's supposed to do? Would you download and run that program?
Hopefully not.
Hopefully not. But your web browser does that.
Well, lots of people do too.
They do. That's true. That's true. But people like to be careful. Some people like to be careful and they wouldn't do this, or they would say that they wouldn't do this. But this is what your web browser does all the time. Every single time you visit a website, it downloads some code. There's probably some JavaScript in there. There might be some Flash in there. There might be other active content in there. And the browser has to render that or execute that in a way that doesn't damage you. And the browser has to keep all the stuff that it gets from one site separate from the stuff it gets from another site. Otherwise, any site could see what any other site was doing. which would be bad if you think about doing your banking and visiting my blog at the same time. If those two sites can talk to each other and can see each other's data, you're going to have a bad day. So the browser's job is to keep all that stuff separate. It's like an impossible job. I don't know how we've gotten this far and still have browsers that actually do this well, but they do. So browsers have a really difficult job, but that's kind of the fundamental job. And web developers have a problem too. I don't mean that they have problems. I mean, everybody has problems, right? So the web developer's problem is to worry about trust and input validation. So what can they trust without validating it? So if trust means that I'm not going to check on this, I'm just going to accept that it's valid, which things is that okay to do with? And which things do I actually need to validate and make sure that it's safe before I use it? So a lot of developers, a lot of people will think initially, well, I don't need to validate too strongly the things that come out of my database because database is cool. We've got awesome DBAs, we've got stored procedures, we've got all sorts of rules about what goes in there. So whatever comes out of that thing, I can trust it. And so they don't validate those things that come out of the database the same way they validate things that come from the search box on your website. And that might be okay. It might not be okay. Is there another place to get, does your database get its data from somewhere else? How does that get filled in? How do you know you can trust it? Do you know you can trust it? Or are you just assuming because we own that system, it must be okay? And this is where I love the idea of a trusted system. People talk about trusted systems, like in capital letters in computing, and what is a trusted system? I think once you get to the point where you realize that a trusted system is not the same thing as a trustworthy system, I think something has clicked in your mind. A trusted system is one that you've chosen not to defend yourself against. So like in the personal category before, these are like your close friends. These are people that you let the walls down, you let them see who you really are. Those people could really hurt you, but they're not going to. Same thing with websites. People are just like websites. So there are places where you need to actually validate, and there are places where you can trust and not have to validate. And then the web app tester's problem is to try to find where that trust has been misplaced. And we do this by aggressively checking assumptions. I haven't come up with a good phrase that I like for this, but that's close enough. So there's this idea that there's these birds that clean out crocodile teeth, and the two of them trust each other. The bird trusts that the crocodile's not going to eat him. I'm not sure what the crocodile is trusting,
and and the bird's going to do something while he's there. But how did that relationship come about?
That's true. That's true. Right. So you're checking when you're doing a web app pen test. You're checking assumptions. That's like all you're doing is checking assumptions. One of the examples that we use a lot for this one is for like a shopping cart. The checkout function. You put stuff in your shopping cart, and then you go and give your address, and then you give your shipping details, and then you give your payment. And somewhere along the lines, the total has been calculated, and the backend has made some decisions. So what if you do that out of order? What if you go, after you've gotten your total, what if you go back and add something else to your cart and then do the last step of the checkout? Do you get that last thing for free? Maybe.
Ooh.
Right. So it's little assumptions like that you need to be looking for while you're checking. So here's a little aside. An aside is a term we use outside of computer science to mean a temporary departure from main theme or a topic or a short digression. But it's also an HTML5 tag, and it's called aside, and it's actually used in this way. So tangentially related. So this is where I'm going to tell you that the only problem any security issue ever has is input validation. There's no other kind of problem. Everything boils down to input validation to a point where it becomes a useless distinction. But if you only had to consider authorized people doing authorized things, then there wouldn't be a security industry. If people only did what they were supposed to do, and if only the right people were ever around, then we wouldn't need all this stuff. So if you look at these on the right here, so I'm going to try a little bit to convince you that input validation is the only problem that exists. So there's a little pointer. So injection, this is when you send some input that's not expected and it does something weird. So that's obviously input validation. Broken authentication, this is going to be where there's something broken, something not correct about how you log into a system. Maybe it doesn't validate your whole password. There are some, I've seen this one a long time ago, that the systems on the back end would truncate the password and only store like the first 5 characters. So you could have a 90-character password, but only the first 5 mattered. It could be that there's like privilege levels are indicated by something that happens during login, and maybe you could mess with those. So that's input validation. Is this person who they say they are, and have they done all the right things? Sensitive data exposure tends to come from, this is like error messages that give you the connection string to the database. That tends to come when some input wasn't expected and was handled poorly. XML external entities is maybe a little bit deep for an introductory thing, but that's another place where I'm sending something in that gets treated a way it shouldn't get treated. Cross-site scripting, same kind of thing. That's input validation and output encoding. When people talk about cross-site scripting, everybody says, oh, input validation, and that's true, but it's also output encoding, because if it was just input validation, then John O'Malley with the apostrophe wouldn't ever be able to sign up for your website. Insecure deserialization. This is another one that's a little deep for an introductory talk, but this is basically if your website uses objects like Java objects or whatever, and ever serializes them, writes them to disk, or makes them into a thing that comes down as a parameter and goes back up to the website, those can be replaced with malicious ones that might do something you didn't expect them to do. And if you don't check that, you're going to have problems. So components with known vulnerabilities, that's like a catch-all, right? Because a vulnerability is like one of those things. So input validation, really, when it comes down to it, is kind of all there is. Lots of different ways of it manifesting itself, but it's all input validation. So I said you need to know a little bit of HTML, and this is enough to get started. If you've ever seen HTML, I assume everybody here has seen a little bit of HTML. There are tags, like the H1s up there. The tags, they open and close, and stuff goes in between them. There are tags. There's a form tag, and I'm only talking about this one because this is how you get input from people. This is what your login form, username and password is in there. Your shipping address, anything you fill in, anytime you type something into a website, it's a form. And these have an attribute called an action, which is the URL that the form submission goes to. And this is interesting because it's not always on the same site as the form. It doesn't always use the same protocol as the form, the page that rendered the form. So maybe the form itself came over HTTP, but the form gets submitted over HTTPS. That's still bad, by the way, even though it gets submitted securely. The form itself is delivered insecurely, so it could be messed with along the way. And then the method, this is a little bit of HTTP. Basically, everything's a get or a post. There are other things, but basically everything's a get or a post. And then some tags, like the form tag and the input tag, have attributes. And the attributes depend on what the tag is. So this one, for an input field, the size attribute says how many characters essentially you're allowed to type into this thing. And it also, the browser also interprets that to mean how wide should I draw this little box. I'm backwards on this. I'm still not used to it. So that's another thing that we do in HTML. And some tags can be self-closing. Every tag has to close. Some tags explicitly close themselves or explicitly get closed like this does, but some tags, particularly in what's called a replaced element, they close themselves. So if you have space / greater than, then that's closing itself. And then we close all the rest of them and we're done. That's enough HTML to get you started. All these are places where stuff can go, where strings of text can go.
And where things can go wrong. Before you keep going, just a couple things. Jay wanted us to mention that the 2 slides ago, those things you were listing out, that was kind of the basis for the OWASP top 10. And then we get the source for that too in the questions. So if you want to check that out more, it's in there.
Yes, I'm sorry, I did not mention that. That was actually the OWASP top 10. That was the 2017 version of OWASP top 10.
Okay.
it got cut off the top of there, and I apologize for that. That's definitely yes. OWASP.
No worries. But the link is in there if you guys want to go check it out on the OWASP site. But and then Mikhail had a question: when is it appropriate to use blacklist validation instead of whitelist?
When is it appropriate? Never. Sometimes it's necessary. So a blacklist means I have a list of things that are bad and I'm not going to accept those. And a whitelist is I have a list of things that are good and I'm not going to accept anything but these. So the problem with the blacklist becomes apparent if you think about it. It means that you have to predict every possible bad thing and write it down on your list.
Which is hard.
Right, it's hard. Sometimes it's possible. Sometimes it works. Sometimes it's better than nothing. But your default should be, I want to try a whitelist, and only if the whitelist fails should you even consider a blacklist.
Yeah. Okay. And then another question: if you go back to the last slide, Mikhail also has another question about: is it okay that the second input tag is not closed?
Uh-oh, is the second input tag not closed? Did I mess up my HTML? Where did we go? HTML. Oh, good catch. Very nice.
Dun-dun.
What do you mean it's not closed?
Thanks, Mikhail, for catching that.
Good one.
Yes. See, so you're on your way to being a web app tester.
Right. Attention to detail. Fantastic. Nice. So a little JavaScript. I almost didn't have any JavaScript on this, but there's two things that you can use while you're testing without really knowing anything about JavaScript that will help you out. And this is like the shortest script that we use in testing a lot. And the script is just between the tags. So these script tags are HTML tags. That's not the script. That just tells the browser that what's in between here is a script. And this is what we use to see if we can get JavaScript to run in a response. So this is like the first thing you would do if there's an input form, like a search field. You would type this into the search field and search for it. And if on the response page, a dialog box pops up that says 1, you found cross-site scripting.
Dun.
Right, scary.
I feel like there's a lot of people that are going to our website right now to test this out.
Hey, no, not without permission. Not without permission, you get yourself in trouble.
You can't. Okay, so that's another question. You can't go to like anybody's website and just put in alert 1 and no.
I would not recommend it. I would not recommend it. No. If you haven't noticed, we live in a litigious society here in North America.
Our sysadmin is saying you'd better not, because bad things will happen to you.
Well, right. See, and if this was like a Windows network pen testing thing, your next question will be, well, then if I can't do it at work, where can I do it? Do I have to set up my own whole domain? And the answer would be kind of yes, you do. But for web apps, there's stuff you can get them like for free, and I'll show you that in a minute. It's another OWASP project because OWASP is fantastic, where you can do those things. You can run them all locally, and then you can send whatever you want against it because it's your own system that's yours.
Jordan also points out you can get your home network dumped if they find you doing bad stuff too. So.
Right. Yes, you can get blocked. You can get Google will do this if not that you're like pen testing Google, but if Google thinks that the activity you're doing, the things you're searching for, looks suspicious, Google every once in a while, maybe you've seen that, you get the CAPTCHA that says, hey, find all the cars in this picture. If you keep going, they'll block you, and you can't use Google services from your IP address for a while, which is unfortunate. If
very
you're behind.
Inconvenient.
It's inconvenient, right? For the entire office, because it's not your IP address, it's the entire office's IP address that gets blocked. Yeah, so don't test against things without permission. And then this other one here, this is another one. So a lot of people will say, oh, well, to block cross-site scripting, I'm just going to filter these tags. I'm going to make a blacklist, and I'm going to say you can't use angle brackets. Done. And that may stop this attack if there's not some way to get the angle brackets through your filter. But that's not the only way to get a script to run. A couple of slides ago, I showed you attributes in HTML tags. This is an attack, a cross-site scripting attempt that would be used if your input shows up in the attribute of an HTML tag in the response. So if you think back to what that one looks like, it's quoted, right? And then there's some space in there, and at the whole time you're in this little guy. Where is my pointer? You're in you're inside these angle brackets. So if you close that thing, whatever it is, the form thing, the width, whatever you're closing, and add a space and then add this is a JavaScript event handler. OnFocus is a JavaScript event. And when that event is triggered, it will run whatever is in these quotes. So this is going to give you that same pop-up alert one thingy, but in a different context in the web application. So this one is perfectly effective in the right places, and it doesn't use any angle brackets. It doesn't use a semicolon. Sometimes blacklist filters, I love the blacklist question. Sometimes blacklist filters will have things in them like angle brackets and semicolons, and they'll say, you know what, you can't do JavaScript without semicolons and angle brackets. And that's true in some contexts.
That'll not stop you.
Right. Well, in some contexts it would, but not in every context. So you detail oriented. Remember details? The details matter. So that's enough JavaScript for this conversation. There's a whole lot more you can do with JavaScript, obviously. I'm not going to get into all of that. The advice here, the three solid resources. So what's stickers, structure? So if you like stickers, if you like to get recognition for your accomplishments, or if you're working with a friend, or if you're working with a group, maybe you're doing some stuff with kids, maybe you've got, so anyway, you can use Codecademy, gives you little stickers and achievements for getting things done. And they have really good introductory classes for JavaScript and a dozen other things. If you like structure, if you want to know how what you're learning about JavaScript today fits into the whole big JavaScript thing, Mozilla has fantastic resources for that, and they're all linked to each other. So if you find out that the one you picked to start with is too deep or too shallow, it's got links in both directions, and you can go either way from there. So this is, if you're like me, this is the one you want. And then snippets is another word that starts with S, because alliteration helps people remember things. And so W3 Schools has lots of similar stuff. They have JavaScript stuff, they have HTML stuff, they have style sheet stuff, and they're all kind of little self-contained, little itty-bitty things. So if you only have 5 minutes and you want to know what this thing looks like, you want to know how does the aside tag work in HTML5, W3 Schools is your place to go. And then here, another OWASP project. OWASP is fantastic. They have so many resources. They have the cross-site scripting prevention cheat sheet. They also have one that helps you bypass filters. But this one will show you why this works and why this works and where. Rule number 1 in this guy covers this case, and rule number 2 in that guy covers this case. So if you didn't quite follow me on why you have this A and that little quote in the space there, go take a look at this, and it will explain it to you in rule number 2.
And there's a bunch of other links in the questions that people have sent in, and also some test websites that you can use. Yes, Nathaniel says OWASP in general is just great.
I could not agree more. They're fantastic.
And then there's a new program from Google, Grasshopper, that I'm sending the link to from Andy. Thank you. And then Mikhail has another question for you, BB. Will the same approach in cross-site scripting exploitation work in modern JavaScript frameworks like React.js and AngularJS?
Modern JavaScript frameworks. Yes. Yes, they can, and it depends on how they're built. So a big difference with modern JavaScript frameworks is that they don't send HTML back. All that stuff I was showing you before about forms and things, you won't see that in the responses from the server. You'll see JSON instead, which is JavaScript object notation, which is another JavaScripty thing that you can get into. You can't help but get into relatively soon once you start this. But because the syntax there is different, because it's not sending down HTML, all these things to manipulate the HTML aren't going to work for you. So their attacks for those tend to be focused in different areas. You can try to break the JSON itself. You can try to close the JSON early and add something at the end. But those frameworks, React and Angular and those guys, they know you're going to try that, and they have really solid JSON parsers. So you have to look elsewhere to make those things work in modern JavaScript applications.
So then cross-site scripting won't, like, it's more of a built-in cross-site scripting protection, or no?
Yes, I would say it is built in, but it only covers what it covers, and it doesn't always cover everything. This is where your detail orientation is going to help you.
Okay, cool.
Good.
Onward.
All right, and a little bit of HTTP. This is HTTP is text. It's a text protocol. Everything that comes up and down that's part of HTTP is text. You can get binary data, but that's like in the body of HTTP. The protocol itself is all just text. That means you can read it and you know enough to read things. In your browser, there's some tools I'm going to show you in a minute that will show you, let you see that HTTP level stuff, what's going in and out of your browser. And honestly, you can learn everything you need to know for this by just watching what your browser does. And keeping in mind this little bit here, there's different character sets. So what's a character set? A character set is all the computer knows is all ones and zeros, right? It's all binary stuff. So how does it know that to draw a picture of an I character on your text? Well, the code, the value of that thing is by convention. That's what we use for the letter I in this case. There's lots of different encodings. So ASCII is the one that you're probably familiar with. UTF-8 is pretty much ASCII. Unicode is kind of 2-byte ASCII with a bunch of other stuff in it. And because spaces and things are what's used to separate stuff in HTTP, you can't have a space in a URL. And now you're saying, but wait a second, I have seen spaces in URLs before. You got to be wrong here. And I'm not wrong here. You can't have a literal space. You can encode your space, and there's two ways to encode a space in URL encoding. One of them is just to use the plus sign, and the other one is to use these three characters, the %20. Percent means, hey, these next two characters are URL encoded, and 20 is the hexadecimal representation of a space. So those, I don't know if you would pick that up by just watching what your browser is doing, but be aware that there's different ways to encode things. And
well, like sometimes blog titles have spaces in them, and the address is a blog title, but it will include some stuff like that because it's having to encode the space in the title.
Yes, I know. Some people put spaces in file names too. They just can't be trained.
I'm sorry.
It's ridiculous. So that's enough of the exposition. So we're going to talk about Firefox and Chrome both have developer tools. And developer tools are kind of like view source. If you've ever done right click on a web page and click on view source, you can see, what can you see? You can see all that HTML I was talking about. And you can see style sheets and JavaScript and whatever all is in there. And this is how we used to learn how to make web applications back like in the 90s. We would just look at other websites and save their HTML and then change it. And now suddenly it's ours, right? And the cool thing about this, if you're not actually like a legitimate, not legitimate, you're all legitimate. If you're not like employed as a pen tester, but you want to learn some of this stuff, this is built into your browser. You're not installing some offensive tool where someone's going to come to your desk and grab you by the ear and make you explain what this thing is. It's part of your browser. It's already there. You don't have to do anything. So you can get to the developer tools in Chrome and Firefox by hitting F12. They're a little bit different. They're the same concept, but they're different browsers, so they're implemented differently. This guy on the left, this is from the developer tools. That's from this place here for Chrome. And this tells you basically, these are all like headings. These are all like instructions. So I want to view and change CSS. How do I do that? Well, you click here and it tells you how to do that. So this is how Chrome describes their developer tools. And Firefox describes theirs with pictures. But they're very much similar. They're not identical, but they're very much similar. So F12, or you can do Control-I, which we're going to talk another little sidebar here about attention to detail. So if you look in the tools menu for these things, this one is Chrome, and this one is Firefox. Somehow they agreed to have the same shortcut. I don't know how that worked out, but awesome on them. But it's Shift plus Control plus a vertical bar. Okay, Shift plus Control plus a vertical bar. So what is that? This is not, you can't tell, right? Because it could be an I, it could be a 1, it could be a
Could be an
lowercase
L.
l. Exactly, right? See, so what is it? So I would do this if I were writing these tools. I would have used a lowercase I, and I would not have said, yes, I would have said shift. I would have used a lowercase I, because you can't confuse a lowercase I with any other character unless you're like trying to find a horrible font. And when you hold down the shift key and you type a letter, you get the capital letter. So to say shift and capital I is redundant and unnecessary. So I would have said shift plus control plus little I, and then we wouldn't have had to have this conversation.
But they didn't, and we do.
Right. It's an imperfect world that we live in, Sierra and friends.
It is.
So here's what they look like in Firefox. And these are fantastic. You could spend so much time just playing with the developer tools. So this is a screenshot I took, and I added all this stuff that's obviously not part of the thing. So this is the browser window up here, this part here and this black part. That's what you would normally see rendered in the browser. And here, these are all tabs. They might not look like tabs, but they are tabs, I assure you. We're looking at the network tab, because that's the one in blue. And there's lots of other tabs there. The other ones that you'll be a lot of interested in is the console tab, and possibly storage, depending on whether your target application is using local storage. Network. We're seeing all this stuff here because we're in the network tab, and all this stuff here is just part, you can't quite see the thumb in the scroll bar there, but this is just a tiny part of all the stuff that came down to render this one page. HTML pages are made up of lots and lots and lots of stuff. There's the HTML itself, and then there's everything it calls in to build that. So every image is a separate thing, every style sheet is a separate thing, every JavaScript is a separate thing. So you can easily have hundreds of resources called in to render a single page. It's more often to have a dozen or so. This is a little unusual to see quite this many, I think. But anyway, it gives you some idea of the complexity that goes into rendering this page. So over here, we're looking at the headers. These are all different areas too. So these are the headers, and it shows the response headers first. And if you scroll down, you can see the request headers. Cool thing in Firefox that doesn't exist in Chrome is this edit and resend button. So this is how you can start learning what's actually going on with the application. If you click that, it gives you a text view of the request headers and the request body, and you can type whatever you want in there and send it again and see what happens. So this is a place where you can do something like, if you see, if the URL includes like a number, like a user ID or something, you could change that number to like one number lower and see if maybe that's points to a different user.
Hopefully not.
with permission. That's an actual case where there was an individual that some of you may know of who actually spent time in federal prison because he did that. He changed a number.
Changed one number.
He changed a number in a URL, and he downloaded stuff that didn't belong to him.
You got to be careful with these skills.
Right. Now that's not all he did. He changed the number like 1,000 times and downloaded a whole bunch of stuff and then talked to the press about it.
Still dangerous stuff.
he called attention to himself, but like I said, we don't look favorably on those things.
A question before you continue on this slide. Can you do tamper data and HTTP headers type stuff with these tools? Nick is wondering, and maybe he says impatient and he should wait for you.
You're not being impatient, you're being detail oriented. And why hasn't he covered this thing that caught my attention? Excellent question. So yes, edit and resend is tamper data. And this, what we're seeing right here, is live HTTP headers. So those are both plugins that we used to have for Firefox. I guess we still do, but now they're built into the developer tools. So absolutely, yes.
Oh, okay, cool. And then Nathaniel asks, do you use Firebug or features like that, or just the developer tools?
The Firebug is kind of what we had before we had developer tools. So yeah, I use developer tools. Firebug was kind of a precursor for this and kind of set the stage for it, I think.
Okay, cool. And then John asks, what if you change the number in the URL and you get other people's information?
Close your browser. Right. Well, then you found a problem, right? And then that's where you got permission ahead of time. And so now you would write that down and you would take notes and you would say, on this URL, I changed this parameter from this to this, and I got this other guy's data and I shouldn't have gotten that. And that'll be part of the report that you give to the person that hired you to legitimately do the test, and then you get paid.
John says, like some other person's kids review on their swimming at camp.
Right. Exactly.
Stop hacking, John.
Stop hacking.
Okay, and then Nick has another question that he's had some of these tools broken on the latest edition of Firefox. Have you experienced that?
I have not seen that, but I'm not shocked. These are meant for developers, and if you're installing new stuff as it comes out, yeah, sometimes they can need a little attention.
Okay. John says, how can you go to prison for something that could have easily been a cut-paste typo? Well, I don't think you'd go to prison for a cut-paste typo, but you could get in trouble.
Right. Right. I could not agree with you more. The changing a number in a URL in a place that you can obviously see it, I think that should not be something you should be punished with prison for. But I do not run the Justice Department.
and it's best not to try and deal with them if you don't have to.
Right. It's like they said in driver's ed, you can be right, but don't be dead right.
Dun dun dun.
Dun, dun, dun. So Chrome developer tools looks very similar, right? So this is the similar thing. So there's the network tab, there's the console you're going to want to look at. Sources is one that Chrome gives you to help see what's all going on in your application. So remember I was talking about how there's the HTML that comes down and there's everything else. Sources shows you that whole package all in one little file and folder internet Windows Explorer type thing, so you can see what all is involved in the thing. And if I click on this, it's going to go to the next page. I was hoping I could click on it, but apparently you can't do that with slides. And this is funny because somebody asked at Stack Overflow, they said, hey, how do you edit and resend stuff in the Chrome developer tools? I don't want to do it in Firefox, but I want to do it in Chrome. And the answers were all like, well, if you just write these 5 lines of JavaScript, it's the same thing. It was so funny how they solved the problem, but maybe not in the way the person asked to have it solved. I love Stack Overflow. So there's that, and I'm taking way more time than I thought I was going to on some of these things. So I'm going to speed through the next couple of things because browser profiles is simple. Browser profiles is like having separate copies of the browser. So you can essentially log into your browser as somebody and get a fresh browser experience. So in Chrome, it's super easy. You just the people menu, add person. In Firefox, it's a little not so easy. You have to run stuff at the command line. And this is the command line in Linux or on Windows. Mac OS has a command line that is often similar to what's on Linux, but in this case, it's totally not. So if you want to do this in Firefox to get started, to get the profile manager up, you have to do some stuff. Go to this place to find out exactly what. Cyber Chef is a project from the GCHQ, which is the British NSA, but it's totally safe and cool. So it's an HTML page. It's just HTML that you download, and you can save it as HTML on your system. So again, nothing to install, nothing looks suspicious as long as this doesn't look suspicious to you. It's just decoding and encoding stuff. This is a cool tool that, again, if you're on a Windows system, if you're at work and you can't install things, it's something you can use with what you've already got. I didn't tell my Swiss Army knife story early on.
Oh, you better tell it. Somebody did ask, what's the cert for cyber or cyber chainsaw army knife? This is Swiss. What's a funny story?
So when I was getting started in doing security stuff, people were saying, I was, well, where should I start? What should I use? And people were rattling off tools. You should learn this tool, learn that tool. And the thing that people always told me I should learn how to use was Netcat. Like, if you want to be a hacker, you got to learn Netcat. And I said, well, what's Netcat? And they say, Netcat, it's the Swiss Army chainsaw. And I said, what is that? I don't understand what that is. And they're like, well, you can do anything with it. I'm like, well, how is that a Swiss Army chainsaw? Like a Swiss Army knife is good because it has lots of tools and you can put it in your pocket.
But a chainsaw.
Right. It's not. You're extending it in the wrong direction. You're taking something useful and you're making it completely useless. And so I asked, I finally got into a class, my first class I took, the first like hacking class I took. I got some people in the room, and a lot of them already knew this stuff. So I asked them, I'm like, hey, I heard about Netcat, and I just don't get it. It's a way to send data across the network kind of arbitrarily. And I said, well, what do you use it for? And the guy's like, oh man, it's a Swiss Army chainsaw. You can do anything with that. And I'm like, I know, but what? And he's like,
All the
chainsaw,
things.
chainsaw. Great. So it was way after that I finally learned what Netcat was good for. But Swiss Army chainsaw it's a bad metaphor.
But
Anyway,
funny, but
right.
funny.
So I thought it was
The answer
hilarious.
is obviously because a chainsaw is better than a saw, and a saw is better than a knife. So if you skip from knife to chainsaw, best ever.
Exactly, right. I don't, what was I thinking?
Duh.
So
All right, so
Cyber
Cyber
Chef.
Chef is awesome.
Yeah, it calls itself the Cyber Swiss Army knife. And so again, attention to detail. There are things that catch my eye, and a lot of them have to do with language. I like language and messing with stuff. So if you take these same words and you put them in a different order, you get something else, right? So a Swiss Army knife.
Is this my favorite word nerd slide coming up?
It is. Are you ready?
Word nerds.
Here it comes. So,
oh my gosh.
so all the same words, right? So you can either have the Cyber Swiss Army knife, or you can have the Swiss Cyber Army knife. They're different things. If things like that catch your eye, consider Webapp Pentesting.
Consider being friends with us because we like word nerds.
Right. So the Cyber Chef stuff, it does these things. It'll do the beautifying JavaScript and JSON and stuff, which means that it'll put carriage returns back in and indent things for you. Different encoding, all those types of things, they're all built into there, and you don't have to install anything. So it's super cool for that. OWASP broken web apps. This is, again, I keep talking about OWASP. This is a collection of targets that you can run locally. You don't really have to install anything except for something to run the VM in. I would say that it doesn't look suspicious, but maybe your network people or your security people would have a different opinion. So I would get permission before you use this one on work asset. And it doesn't generate odd traffic either, as long as you use it in host-only networking, which means that traffic never leaves your system. So here's where it is. And I put this on here because I thought you all might want to see SourceForge again, because it's been a little while. Everyone's moved to GitHub, and we all pretend that we know how to use Git. But SourceForge is where things used to be. It's like the old guy's GitHub. And it was last modified in 2015. So you might be saying, why are we talking about this crazy old thing? Get with the program, man. Modern JavaScript framework. But it's still relevant. I mean, a lot of the things are different if you're using the modern JavaScript frameworks, but they have the same like history. So it's the same signatures still show up again and again and again. And in this one virtual machine, there are 33 different applications, 33 of them. You could spend an entire year like playing with all these different things. There's training applications. So these are things that are meant to help you learn how to do pen testing. There are realistic, intentionally vulnerable applications. So they're realistic. They're not like find cross-site scripting in this page. They're more right. They're like a step up from that. So you have to figure out what the vulnerability might be. Right. And then this is my favorite one. There's old vulnerable versions of real applications. So old.
Which someone pointed out, if this was old in 2015, these are like anciently outdated now.
Right. They are. But if you ever wanted to hack on WordPress and be successful, this is a great place to do it.
Nobody uses WordPress.
Nobody does.
I'm just kidding.
Right. Well, this is one where people will say, "Oh, WordPress, oh, PHP, oh my gosh, it's just going to knock right over if you look at it funny," and that's not true. They do a great job keeping up with it. So going back to the older versions is neat because you might be familiar with WordPress, and this one is vulnerable. So you can even like Google what the vulnerabilities are if you want to find them and see how they actually manifest in a real application.
Nice.
So yes, it's old, but don't let that deter you. And then right after all the old stuff is the brand new stuff. And this is Juice Shop, which no matter how many times I try, I cannot say quickly.
Choose the shop.
Juice
It's
shop.
like slash choose wisely slash choose.
Yeah, exactly.
Choose shop.
Right. So this one is a modern JavaScript web application. You can install it if you want to, but you don't have to. I don't think it looks suspicious, and it doesn't generate any traffic of its own, but you will be sending traffic to it. So depending on how you have it set up, it may be suspicious. So Juice Shop is another OWASP project from Bjorn Kiminich, who is he's German. And look at this. This is his OWASP. This is his GitHub graph from yesterday. The guy is a busy guy, and he's contributing lots of stuff. So thank you, Bjorn,
Hey, he's
for
like the
Juice
German
Shop.
Bo Bullock.
Right,
Mike Felch.
right. With the yeah. So this is available on GitHub, and then Docker, and then Gitbooks. It's like all over the place. He is so on top of all the modern stuff that that I can't keep up with. This is the 8 options that he lists on the project for how you might install it or how you might get it running. So you can install it for free on Heroku. You don't need to do anything then. It runs out in the cloud, on the Heroku cloud, and you can attack it there. You just clone the repo into your own GitHub thing and run it up from there. You can use Docker to pull the container and run it. You can install it from source, from packages. There's a Docker toolbox. There's Vagrant. There's Amazon EC2. There's an Azure Web App. All these things, if you want to waste a lot of time trying to figure out what they all mean, you have all these choices. So I know for a lot of you, these are meaningful things, and you probably already have Docker installed, or maybe you're a big Node.js fan and this stuff just makes sense to you. These are all options to get this thing up and running.
Hey, we are almost out of time for the hour, but I don't want to like rush this because it's been really interesting. So if you have to leave, no worries. We are recording it. We're going to go ahead and finish it out at the regular speed because this is awesome and I think it's really useful. But before we finish, for all of you who have to go off and do other stuff after the hour, I just want to announce the t-shirt winner. Yes, if you're here, Joseph, now I'm going to butcher your last name, so I apologize, but it's Juknowitz. So if you're here, go ahead and let me know. And I don't see you replying in the questions. So, oh, you are here. Okay. Well, Joseph, thank you for being on here. And go ahead and email me your size and he says I was close with his last name. Go ahead and email me your size and address, sierra@bhs.co. And if you have to leave, no worries. Thank you for coming. And we'll go ahead and continue. BB King.
Yes, we are so close to finished with the content.
But you also have like a demo, right?
I do have some stuff to play with at the end.
Yes.
Nothing new, just kind of showing some of the stuff I've talked about. And then there's Burp Suite. You can't talk about Webapp Pentesting without talking about Burp Suite. So Burp Suite is an intercepting HTTP proxy and a vulnerability scanner. This is something that sits between your browser and the network. And everything that your browser says, it says to Burp, and then Burp forwards on to the server. And everything the server means to say back to your web browser, it actually says to Burp, and then Burp sends it back on to your browser. So in that position, you have the opportunity to, one, as a student of HTTP, to observe the traffic and see what things happen, how that stuff all goes. And two, as a more active observer of HTTP, you can change stuff. You can change the requests, you can change the responses. It's much more useful to change the requests because in the real world, it's hard to get in on a response. But so you'll see things like a common misconception among developers and folks who haven't spent a lot of time in this yet is that if I say on my input field, if I put that max length or that size of 20, then there's no way somebody can give me more than 20 characters in this field. And that's not true. All of those things in the HTML, they're all suggestions to the browser, and the browser will follow them. But if you can get in the middle there, you can change the suggestion to the browser, or you can just send the request without using the browser at all. So some of these things, some of these attacks that we look at, people think, oh, well, look how long that is. To do like a whole big long SQL injection attack, you need like 185 characters, and I only give you 16, so I'm solid. But no, maybe you can't do it through the browser, but you don't have to use the browser. You can use Burp Suite or other stuff. So Burp Suite kind of needs to be installed. It's a Java application, so you can either download the jar, and if you have Java installed, then you run it that way, or there's a like a bundled executable now that you can use if you don't have Java installed. So you can install it, but you don't have to. And I would say it looks suspicious. It's not like harmful. It's more lockpicks on your desk suspicious than wearing a ski mask in the house suspicious or in the office. So you'll want to get permission if you're doing this on a work asset. But it's not, I mean, it's a testing tool. It's not necessarily a pen testing tool. You could use it to test web apps. You could use it to test APIs, JSON APIs or XML APIs, all those things. And it does generate odd traffic. That's kind of the whole point.
Hey, before you go on to the next slide, we have a bunch of questions.
Good.
So this is from a couple slides ago when I think when you were talking about SourceForge, but Dan asks about VulnHub. Is that something you find useful?
VulnHub is a place where they make available primarily, I think, virtual machines of vulnerable applications, and it can be useful. Yes, I haven't seen a lot of web applications on there though.
Okay.
The things I see are typically Linux applications where someone's trying to, they've made a little CTF, they made a little project. They tend to be a different kind of testing.
And then Nick asked a while ago too, so I'm not sure what he was referencing, but are these useful for testing IDPs and IPSs?
IPS is intrusion protection. IDP is an identity provider. Maybe he meant IDS. So intrusion detection systems.
Yes, he did. Sorry, did I not say that? My bad.
That's okay. We love our acronyms. Are they useful for testing those? Yeah, they are, because you can generate the type of traffic that would indicate an attack and see if your systems are noticing that. That's a useful thing to do, yes.
Okay, and then Alexander says, a common question I get for Burp, what are your favorite extensions for it?
My favorite extensions. I always forget to go and use the extensions. There's one that we've been playing with here at VHS recently called Auth Matrix, like authentication matrix, and you can define, like, if your application has different roles, like there's an admin and a manager and a regular user, you can define those, and then you can help it understand which parts of the application should be available to those different roles. And then you log in as each of those users, and then Burp uses those session cookies like automatically to test all those boundaries that you said should be there. And it gives you a really pretty color-coded red, yellow, green type thing that indicates areas where your expectations were not met. That's a really cool one. There's a JavaScript beautifier in there. I can't remember what it's called. I use that one a lot to try to read JavaScript that's been minified. And then what's the other one? There's another one whose name I forget also that lets you write arbitrary Python extensions yourself, like on the fly. And that one's pretty handy too.
Cool. And then Chris asks if you've used Fiddler, which he says is like Burp Lite, but looks less sketchy to some admins.
Oh, does it? That's good to know. Yes, I have used Fiddler. Fiddler is another intercepting proxy for Windows. I think the new ones actually run on macOS also. I could be wrong about that. But yes, and Fiddler is actually cool if you're testing Windows applications, because they sometimes don't respect the same proxy settings that you need to set in order to get Burp Suite to work. And it can override things like Windows Store apps that communicate a little bit differently with the network. It can do those. Yes, and Fiddler is fantastic for those things. There are some things that you kind of need Fiddler to do. You can't do them with Burp. So if you're on Windows specifically, Fiddler is great to look at.
And how about OWASP Zap?
OWASP Zap is like Burp, but it's free. Burp has a community edition, which is free and has limited functionality, and then the professional version. Zap is all just free, and the free version of Zap has lots of stuff you have to pay for in Burp Suite. So that's definitely worth looking at as well. It's also a Java application, so anywhere Burp runs, it will run. It has a built-in scanner, which is really kind of cool. It's different. And just by the virtue of being different, it's useful to have that and Burp. There are some things that maybe the scanner in Burp Suite might find that Zap won't, or the other way around. Zap is definitely worth taking a look at too.
Okay, and then one more from Alex. Is there any reason why you wouldn't want to just do an active scan in Burp on a site that you have permission to test?
Yes, yes, there are. Oh, back to Zap. Matt Toussaint did a webcast here in this same forum maybe 2, 3, 5 months ago about Zap.
You can find by going to blackhillsinfosec.com/webcasts.
Right, right. So what was the question? Oh, active scanning a whole site. So there are a couple of reasons why you don't want to do that. One is if you active scan the whole site, it's going to take forever. I generally just do targeted scans in Burp. I'll look for something that I think might be vulnerable or might be representative of the types of requests that are in the whole application, and I'll scan those. There's just so many inputs and so many possibilities that to send the entire site to that all at once and have it go is often counterproductive and takes a long time. The other is if you don't know how the application works before you send a scanner at it, you can really break stuff, which if you have permission is better than if you don't have permission, but it's still bad. If you, for example, even just spidering, even just clicking links in the application, there are sometimes if you're logged into the application, there are functions that happen just by nature of visiting them. So there might be like a delete button somewhere. The scanner and even the spider is going to click that button. So if things can be deleted by just navigating through and clicking on stuff in the app, then your spider is going to delete things. That can be bad. It's especially bad if you don't know what's going to happen, or if you didn't expect it, or if you haven't explored that thing yet that you're deleting because now it's gone. So using the Burp active scanner, I always just send like 1 or 2 requests at a time. There's great optimization advice on this one. Tim Tomes who's actually, hey, he's going to be at DerbyCon, which I forgot to mention. The DerbyCon registration for training opened an hour ago when I started talking.
Yes.
And Tim has a class at DerbyCon where he's teaching Webapp Pentesting stuff. But on his website, he's got a great list of little Burp tricks. There are things that are kind of, I wouldn't say hidden, but they're not well documented in Burp. And one of them that he's got in there is how to do a very targeted scan covering only the things that you want to cover more safely and more quickly.
Okay. We have a few more questions. I'm not sure if you want to answer those now or go on. What would you like to do?
Let me show you one thing in the Firefox developer tools, and then we'll answer more questions. And then I got to show you, now's the time on Sprockets when we dance. All right. So do I have it? Yes. See, look, this is Juice Shop, which I was going to show you. This is Chrome. This is Firefox. So if we look at the developer tools by going, which one is it? F12, F12. F12, F12.
Work developer tools.
Oh boy, my keyboard manager came up. It's confusing me. All right, so Control-Shift-I. That's also not working. All right, so we're going to go down here and we're going to say Web Developer Toggle Tools. All right, so I'm on network and I want to see what this looks like. So I'm going to reload the page. And this is all that stuff I was talking about that gets filled in. Now check this out. If you want to learn about HTTP, this is another thing that's in the Firefox tools, but not the Chrome tools. So look at all this. These are all the response headers, and see this little question mark next to these things? So strict transport security, what do you think that is? I don't know. Let's click on the question mark. Check. This is what's so cool about Mozilla's training resources, not just for this, but I talked before about their JavaScript stuff and their HTML stuff. Fantastic. So any header, you click on that question mark and you get this whole article. Look how long it is about what this header is, what it's used for, what the syntax is. So if you haven't seen that header before, this is all you need to do to learn pretty much all you need to know as a tester about that header. As a developer, you might need to know some more, but as someone who's just looking at what has already been implemented by someone else, this is it. So set cookie, you see this one all the time. So these are all the options for the set cookie header. There's an expires, there's a max age, there's secure flag, that's really important. There's HTTP only, that is too. So all of these all these headers. There's full documentation behind them all. They're fantastic. So that's what I wanted to show you in the developer tools. Fantastic
Nice.
education resources in there.
You could definitely learn about web app testing for the rest of your life and not
Right.
know everything.
It's all there. It's all free.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So you said there were more questions?
Yeah, a couple more. So Andy said, kind of going back to talking about Zap, but would it be more suspicious than having Zap Metasploit, Jack the Ripper, and a Bitcoin wallet?
That's not suspicious at all. I don't understand the
What are you
question.
talking about? I guess that wasn't a question. That was a comment. So some of these longer ones I didn't get to, but then X48 Moho, which, yes, asks, is there a way to work my way through a really complex client-side code?
Really complex client-side code. Well, that's the kind of the cool thing about web apps is you kind of get there as piecemeal, kind of slowly. There's not a lot of client-side stuff that matters all that much in most web apps. Now there can be some, of course, but all the client-side stuff you can bypass just by using the proxy or creating your own requests or using a browser that you've customized. So getting into client-side stuff, what would that be? That would be a JavaScript framework. That could be some Flash or Silverlight or those things that are still out there. You can get into reversing those and decompiling those, but I would do that later. Do that after you're a little bit more comfortable with the basic web app stuff.
Cool. And then Nick has kind of another question. How common is it that you would be given a qual site to go at as opposed to a prod site, assuming qual equals prod, or is that just a silly question?
No, that's a great question. And that's what we ask for. I always prefer to test outside of production because then if you break something, you haven't broken production. But the problem with that is that sometimes there is not a QA area that is equivalent to production. And you could argue that it's not possible to have a QA region that's equivalent to production, if only because you don't have a million people using it all at once. And that million people using it might have some security implications. But if you do it in a lower region, and if you can be sure that the code is the same and the configuration is the same, then you've quantified what the difference is, and you can take that into account in the findings that you come up with. So yeah, if you can test outside of production, do. But a lot of times, in my previous job when I worked in a corporation, I always tested on test versions of our applications. But here that happens a whole lot less often, partly because not everybody has a huge QA region, and partly because sometimes it's difficult to get to it. You have to be on the network, and maybe they don't want us on their network. They just want to do the external thing. So trade-offs, everything is trade-offs, but a good question.
No doubt. Brian says operations need something to do, so break it.
They've got to be bored. What can they be doing in there at the SOC all day?
What do they even do?
They only have that single pane of glass, right? Just the one. What's the deal?
Mikhail asked another question. As far as I know, Juice Shop actively uses WebSockets. Does Firefox Developer Tools support that too?
I haven't looked to see if it does. WebSockets is something I need to spend more time on. Burp Suite will show them to you. It'll show you what's going on with the WebSocket, but it doesn't give you an opportunity to intercept and modify it, and it doesn't include those in the active scanning stuff. So WebSockets is an area where there aren't awesome tools yet. So that's a good question, and it's a place that that we need more help.
We're still improving.
Yep.
Burp Suite does not allow you to edit WebSockets too.
Correct.
Okay, that he also added that. Any other questions before we wrap it up? That kind of, if I didn't get to yours, sorry, but I think that takes care of all of our questions. So anything else to add?
I think if you're interested in this stuff, if you're kind of detail oriented, if things like the order of words jumps out at you sometimes, spend some time, just play with the developer tools. Just see what's going on with the web application. As long as you're in the developer tools for a browser that's already on your system, then you're not doing anything that that's going to cause trouble, right? I mean, unless you actively choose to do something that's going to cause trouble. You don't have a tool, you don't have something suspicious going on. And always get permission before you're testing somebody else's website. But you can passively observe everything. There's no trouble with that. If you're allowed to visit the website, then there's nothing
You're
wrong with
allowed to look at it.
Right. You can look at the HTML just as well as you can look at it rendered. What's the difference? So playing with these things is a great way to see what all is out there and how some of this stuff works. If you look through this, like here, there's green and then there's yellow and there's a number here that's different than that number. What is that? Why are those numbers different? So figure that out. And that's where you start building the knowledge of other things where there's another small difference that's going to get your attention, because now you have that knowledge to understand that small difference might be significant.
Nice. Eric has another question for you. What characteristics do you look for on a website to tell you what to run tests on?
I look at I take kind of what we always call like a risk-based approach. So where's like the highest value thing? So the first thing is there a logon? And is there a way to create a new account? And is there a way to do account recovery? I forgot my password, that type of thing. So these are all things that I consider to be like login bypass opportunities. If I can somehow reset someone else's account, then I don't have to, right, then I don't have to find another vulnerability, then I can just get into their account. So I'll focus on those first. And then if there is a logon,
especially because pen testing is so time sensitive.
Yes, it is. It is. There's never enough time. And then I'm going to start looking for places where there are inputs. So where there's a form to fill out, where there are parameters being sent back and forth, maybe on the URL, even if I haven't filled out a form. And I'm going to look at the cookies to see where and when it sets what types of cookies. And basically, I'm looking for inputs. Where can I put input in? Where might the application be making some poor assumptions about what kind of input is coming in? And that's where I'm going to start poking at the most likely to be vulnerable areas.
Awesome. All right. Well, I guess that wraps it up for us. It was a little longer, but thanks. We had like almost everybody stay on for the whole thing. So
Yeah,
awesome.
thank you.
If you have questions or if you want the slides from BB before we post it, you can get those by emailing him at bbking@bhis.co.
Yes.
And everyone that came, we're so happy that you got to be here with us. You're super fun. I always love talking to our audience. And Max says, this is better than going back to work. So many of you appreciated this. So if we didn't get your question answered, go ahead and email BB, bbking@bhis.co. He can also give you the slides, but this will post next Monday unless we have anything crazy happen to us. But hopefully we'll post this next Monday on both our YouTube and our website with the link to the slides. And if you have any other questions or comments that are just general ones, you can email me at sierra@bhis.co. So thank you, BB, for being on. You're super awesome, and we really appreciate it. And Kent says BB is the best. I totally agree. You are the best. I say that to everybody, but you really are. I love you. So
Right now, it's all about me.
Thanks for taking the time to put this together. It was super awesome and really useful. And I feel like a lot of people will really love this. So thank you.
Cool.
All right. Take care, guys. Thanks for being on. Bye.
Thanks.